Friday morning. Stick around. Morning Joe starts right now.
Hundreds of people gathered for a President Trump campaign rally in Bemidji, and according to state health officials, at least 9 people who went to the rally have now tested positive for COVID-19.
One case was known to be infectious. There were 2 hospitalizations that were associated with that, one who was in intensive care.
To shuttle all of these people back to their cars, the Trump campaign hired 40 buses. Officials say the buses were delayed and people had to wait to get back to their cars. Police tell us there were about a half dozen supporters who were transported to hospitals for a variety of medical reasons.
The president's rally drew thousands with little social distancing and few masks. And in a separate challenge, in the 87-degree heat, multiple people passed out, 12 taken to the hospital. And the president said this as a fire truck sprayed water into the crowd.
Are they doing that on purpose? Are they friend or foe?
COVID in Minnesota.
Boy, that looks like fun.
Hypothermia in Nebraska and heat exhaustion in Florida. The health risks of a Trump rally.
Triple threat there, Willie, guys. It's dangerous to your health to go to those things, man.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, start with the gathering on its own for COVID reasons, and then this is an additional layer. But the larger problem is that you're smushing a bunch of people together in a time when we're racing toward new records of infections and deaths are nearing 1,000 a day. And Donald Trump is carrying on with these rallies and carrying on with his rhetoric as if that's not happening.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, other people in his family are dismissing the seriousness of this, saying, oh, it's all gone away. Donald Trump keeps saying we're turning the corners. We keep setting records for the number of coronavirus cases every day, and we had 1,000, I think over 1,000 people died of COVID-19 yesterday. And just to put this in perspective, that's more people dying in one day than died in U.S. fatalities in Afghanistan over the past decade. Donald Trump talks a lot about how long we've been in Afghanistan and soldiers that are still getting killed in Afghanistan and the Marines. More people died yesterday of COVID in America. It's something, you know, we just, again, now take for granted every day. But more people died yesterday of COVID in America than died in the Afghanistan war, U.S. soldiers, over the past decade.
It's staggering at this point, the disconnect. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Peter Baker, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of Way Too Early, Casey Hunt, and politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at The Grio, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson, is with us this morning. So we're now in the final 4 days of campaigning ahead of Election Day. Today is all about the Midwest. Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden will make stops in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Trump in Rochester, Minnesota, and Green Bay, Wisconsin. Biden in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Milwaukee. Trump also rallies in Michigan, just outside of Detroit, while Biden holds a drive-in rally in Des Moines, Iowa. Willie.
So we know where their focus is. Let's look at the polling this morning, 4 days out. In Pennsylvania, the latest Quinnipiac University poll shows Joe Biden ahead there by 7 points, 51 to 44. A couple of polls out of Florida. Monmouth University gives Joe Biden a 6-point advantage, 51 to 45% in that poll. And Quinnipiac has Biden ahead by 3 in the state, 45 to 42. In Ohio, the Quinnipiac poll shows Biden ahead by 5 points, 48 to 43. And in North Carolina, the latest New York Times Siena College poll puts Joe Biden ahead by 3 points there as well, 48 to 45. Also, Iowa, President Trump ahead by 1 point, 47 to 46% Joe. So airtight in all those states. I know you're skeptical of any polling that shows a 5-point lead in the state of Florida because you're focused on that. You run for office there. What are you seeing in Florida, Joe? And why don't you believe a poll that shows a 5-point spread?
Well, and also, didn't we have a 5-point spread in Ohio for Biden?
Yes, in this poll, yeah.
Yeah, that ain't happening. I mean, I feel like Harry Bailey at the end of It's a Wonderful Life, like sobbing, help me believe again. I want to believe again. I want to believe in polls again.
Come on.
It's so comforting when you can look at a poll and go, oh, that's great. Well, Well, let's just talk about Florida. So there's a number of polls out. Florida +6 Biden, Florida +3. That's a little closer to the reality. We had a New York Times Siena poll that had Florida +4. Smartest Democratic operative I know, who ran a massive poll across Florida, has Biden up 4. Maybe it will happen. Maybe it will happen. But if you look at the early numbers, if you look at the data coming out of Florida, Republicans keep chewing away at that huge 430,000 vote lead the Democrats had last weekend. They knock it down about 50,000 every day. Republicans are outperforming Democrats on a massive scale. They're going plus 50,000 about every day. So where is that Democratic energy after 4 years of Donald Trump? They lost another 40, 50,000 yesterday. So now that lead's been whittled down to 150,000 votes. That goes all, and that's going to keep going all the way through Sunday for early voting. So Republicans have a massive advantage there. You look at the numbers out of Miami-Dade, Joe Biden is still underperforming. So right now, I see all the polls that show a 4 or 5 point lead for Joe Biden, but I see the data on the ground. I also understand that this is, forgive me, Steve Kornacki, but this is exactly what pollsters were saying not 4 years ago in Florida, 2 years ago in Florida, when they had Ron DeSantis down by 5 points. They had Rick Scott, current senator, Rick Scott down by 4 or 5 points. It seemed like every poll had Gillum as the next governor of Florida. It was an absolute shock when he ended up losing. And so again, I see these Florida polls, 6, plus 5, plus 4. They just don't ring any more true than that Ohio poll that has Joe Biden up by 5 points. I do not know what universe. Now, if it happens, I'll be shocked, and the pollsters will have it right. But, Steve, we keep talking about 2016 and the pollsters getting it wrong. They got a lot of the upper Midwest states and Florida wrong in 2018.
Yeah. Yes, that's a critical point for people to keep in mind, I think. There were changes made to polling at the state level after 2016, and we'll see how they hold up. But I do think it's worth remembering in 2018, a particular type of state with a large non-college white population, state with a large rural white populations. You saw misses. You saw misses in the polling in 2018 statewide in Ohio. You saw it in Indiana. You saw it in Missouri. You saw it in Tennessee. You saw it in North Dakota. Some demographic characteristics there that tie a lot of those states together. I know a lot of them lean Republican, but it is a question, I think, when you look at some of those polls out of the Midwest, and like you said, the example of 2018 in Florida looms large. The modern history of Florida always being a 1 or 2 point race looms large. Of course, in Florida, we're always talking about it seems there is some kind of trade-off in place when you look in these parties, in these polls where the Democrats maybe have gained ground. Biden has with seniors in Florida, just as he's losing ground with Hispanics, more particularly Cuban Americans in South Florida. Florida always has a way of finding equilibrium, it seems, by Election Day.
Yeah. So it does. Now, I will say, and I think it was Josh Barrow last night who commented that, yes, there are trade-offs in Florida, but all trade-offs aren't created equally. As somebody who's been on the ballot 4 times in Florida, I can tell you, if I had to choose a trade-off where I lost more Cuban Americans than Hillary Clinton did 4 years ago, but I picked up a lot more white seniors, I take the old white seniors any day of the week in the state of Florida, because that's a pickup on a fairly massive scale. So I will say this. If Joe Biden overperforms among older white seniors, where Hillary Clinton underperformed last time, and if those independents, we've already had 1.6 million third party, other party, non-Republican, Democratic, non-affiliated Floridians vote already. 1.6 million. We don't know how those are going to break. If those break for Joe Biden, then yes, maybe Biden gets a 3-point lead. But those are a couple of big ifs.
You know, the other thing you mentioned, that white seniors, older voters in Florida in particular, key, obviously, to Florida. But remember, we're going to get the Florida result early. We think we're going to get a lot of results in that 7, 8 o'clock hour from Florida. And just remind you what happened in 2016 and what we could tell from that vote that came in Florida in 2016. Think along the Gulf Coast in Florida when you saw at 7:45, 8 o'clock on election night 2016 that Donald Trump was running 10, 15 points better in these counties than Mitt Romney had 4 years earlier. He was hitting levels you didn't think a Republican was going to hit in terms of support. He was seeing turnout levels you didn't think a Republican was going to be able to create. You saw that along the Gulf Coast. It told you, A, that Trump had a shot to win Florida, certainly, which he ended up doing. But it also told you, wait a minute, who are the older white voters who live along the Gulf Coast, who have moved to the Gulf Coast of Florida? Oh, they're from Wisconsin. They're from Michigan. They come down from the Midwest and they retire to the Gulf Coast. So if you're seeing that surge along the Gulf Coast of Florida early for Donald Trump, it told us in 2016, look out for it in a couple hours when we start getting those votes from the Midwest, which is exactly what happened. But work that in reverse, thinking ahead to election night 2020. If it's not showing up this time, if you're seeing the kind of shift you're describing among seniors in those Gulf Coast counties, the question you start asking then is, A, does that say something about where Florida might be going? But B, does that portend a shift in the Midwest later in the night as well?
Well, and that's a great point, Steve, because I remember early 2004. I was on panel with Chris Matthews. I think Brokaw came on some. Howard Feynman was there. Mike Barnacle. We were sitting around, and this is something for people to be looking at 7:15, 7:30 when those Florida results came in. I started looking. I didn't, because the whole state of Florida doesn't report, obviously, until 8 o'clock when the central time zone part of the Florida, my part of the state, starts reporting. But I could tell by 8 o'clock, by comparing what Bush had done in 2004 with what he was doing in 2004 in these Florida counties, whether it was in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach, or whether it was at the center of the state, or whether it was up in Jacksonville and Duval County, I could tell that Bush was so overperforming his 2000 numbers that I turned to people on the panel and I said, hey, Florida's not going to be close this year. And not only is it not going to be close here, since there's so many transplants in this state, if Bush is outperforming himself here, this is going to also be true across the Midwest. It's also going to be true. And it ended up being that way. That's why, Steve, we've all been hearing that, yes, Pennsylvania, it's going to take them 18 years to count all the votes in Pennsylvania. But it's important for people to remember that by 7:30, especially if 75, 80% of Floridians have already voted, by 7:30, we can go in and look at a lot of these counties, especially in the middle of the state, and like you said, along the Gulf Coast. If Donald Trump is underperforming by 10, 15% what he did 4 years ago in those Florida counties, that's not just bad news for him in Florida. That's bad news for him across the country. Now, if Donald Trump is doing as well in even those small counties, some of which will have 90% of their vote in and will get it by 7:30 at night on election night, if you take some of those counties in the center of the state and Donald Trump is holding those margins, well, Joe Biden may be in for not just a long night, a very long few weeks.
Well, and look, how about this? I'll call this up. This is what happened on election night 2016 in Florida. Actually, let me hit the button right here. So here, as an example, take a look. Take a look at Pasco County. That's what I was trying to call up. This is one of those counties I remember seeing early on election night, just north of Tampa, Gulf Coast. Look at the Trump margin here, 59-37 over Clinton. Look what we were comparing that to just 4 years earlier. Romney had won it by 7. Trump was winning it by 3 times the margin that Mitt Romney had won it by. And you saw this all over the place on the Gulf Coast. And so you're absolutely right. What we're going to be doing on election night 2020 is we're going to have the 2020 result right here, and we're going to call this up, and we're going to say, how does this compare? county after county, to 4 years ago. And we saw all the trends you're describing in Florida. We saw them. Are they being replicated? Have they changed in a way that favors the Democrats? Have they changed in a way that favors the Republicans? Have they canceled each other out? Do they say something about what's going to come later? But yeah, I expect, it was Tim Russert 20 years ago who said Florida, Florida, Florida. But that's my expectation for the early hours of election night 2020. There's going to be a lot of Florida, and there's going to be potentially a lot coming out of Florida and some other states in North Carolina and Ohio and Georgia, some other states too. But I think that could be telling us something very significant about the national race.
Well, and Willie, Pasco County, let's look at Pasco County that Steve has up on the big board right now. That's one of the 4 or 5 counties that I'm going to be looking at, that you're going to be looking at 7:15, 7:30 when they dump the votes, because, again, they're going all of the early votes, unlike Pennsylvania and the other Midwest states. Florida's counting the votes right now. They're counting the absentee votes right now. They're counting the early votes right now. Polls close at 7. They drop them at 7:15, 7:30. And again, in a county like Pasco County, they're going to have counted already 90%, 95% of the votes. That's going to come at us very quickly. And Pasco County is one of those counties. If we can show, Steve, by the big board right there and show the numbers there, you look at what Barack Obama got in 2012 and see that he got 46%. Hillary Clinton gets 37%. If we're seeing a number for Joe Biden out of Pasco County at 7:15, 7:30 on election night, and he's sitting at 42, 43%, that's big news, because that means a lot of those Obama, Trump voters are edging back towards Joe Biden. And that means that some of those older white voters are breaking away from Donald Trump. If Trump holds his numbers and Biden is down in the 30s in Pasco County and about 10 other counties in the middle of the state, then again, great news for Donald Trump. He's holding on to the people that he knows he needs to win, and that will carry him through Florida and maybe some other states as well.
Yeah, there's a reason Donald Trump was in Tampa yesterday on a hot day. He knows exactly where he needs to be and what he needs to do in the state of Florida. And even if you move over a couple of counties to Pinellas County, President Obama won that county. Donald Trump flipped it back in 2016. So we're going to be the I-4 corridor. We're going to have a close eye on that all night, and I know you will too, Steve. I've heard from a lot of people over the last few days wondering, with all the mail-in vote and the early voting, how exactly to process the numbers that we'll have coming in on election night. So as you look, you mentioned Georgia, you mentioned Florida, you mentioned North Carolina, Ohio should have a pretty good feel for those states. But what are the places where, if it drags on, it could be a couple of days? And how should we look at the percentage that we get in first, that vote that's in the bank, the early vote, while we wait for other votes to be counted?
Yeah, it's going to vary by state, and maybe we could just start. We could use 2016 in Florida as an example here. And obviously, things are a little bit different this year because of the pandemic, because of the emphasis on early voting. But 4 years ago, when Donald Trump carried Florida, you see by 1.2 here. Going into Election Day, all of these daily updates we're getting on early voting in Florida, the ballot advantage for Democrats going into Election Day was 90,000. And what that translated into when those ballots were all counted was that Hillary Clinton won the early/mail-in vote in Florida in 2016 by 6 points. So everything that's going on now, this period in 2016 in Florida, Hillary Clinton won by 6 points. That's what it ended up being. Then the folks who went out on Election Day and voted, Donald Trump won them by 12 points. Trump won the Election Day vote in Florida by 12. You put those two buckets of votes together, that's what it added up to. So again, what you saw in 2016 overall was a Democratic advantage in the early/mail votes because of the way Florida reports out its results, as Joe was saying. In that first hour, especially when you get these big reports out from these counties and you're seeing 70, 80% of their vote, this is the bucket you're seeing initially. Then this is the bucket that gets added to it. So in a state like Florida, you might expect that the earliest numbers you get are going to be the best numbers that Joe Biden sees in Florida. And then the question is going to be, can he hold on as the votes from this bucket, which are probably going to be more Trump-friendly, as those are added in across the state? That's a story in a state like Florida. Now, it's probably going to be different in a state if you go into a Pennsylvania, for instance. Pennsylvania is a bit of a mishmash here in terms of how different counties are doing it. But there are some counties in Pennsylvania that aren't even going to touch their mail-in ballots until the next day. And they're only going to report out on election night the votes that were cast on election day. There are other counties, there are other places in Pennsylvania, the city of Philadelphia, for instance, that are going to report out probably a big chunk of their mail-in vote along with their same-day vote. They're going to get more of a mix. But even in a place like Philadelphia, it's going to take days to get through and process those hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots. So if in Florida, the story is going to be the early vote that gets reported is favorable to Biden, and then it gets more Trump-friendly as the night goes on. In Pennsylvania and a couple other places, the story is going to be the first numbers you see, and probably for a few hours on election night, for all of election night, are going to be the best that Trump sees in Pennsylvania, and then they're going to improve for Biden as the mail comes in, and the question is going to be, can Biden chip away at a race, overtake whatever advantage Trump establishes?
That's a good explanation. It varies based on the states. So you're looking at the polling averages in these critical swing states that we've been looking at for months and months and months now, seeing where they are. We're 4 days out. How close are these states, Steve?
Yeah, we could take a look here, go through them. And again, there's 3 tiers here, really. We always talk about Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The 3 Trump barely won, but we're so critical to his Electoral College math in 2016. The polling there continues to be the strongest Biden polling, the biggest Trump vulnerabilities in the swing states. This is the current real clear average for those 3 states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Again, if Biden just wins those 3 states, overwhelmingly likely he has won the election. It's very difficult to see Trump coming up with 270 without those. Now, when you move to Florida, Arizona, North Carolina, states Trump won in 2016, but he won them by much smaller margins. The polling there, this is the real clear average. They got Biden by a point and change in Florida. They got Arizona in a tie. There are some, I should note, there are some of these other poll averagers who have Biden up by about 2 points in Arizona right now. It depends what mix of polls you use and what weight you give them. North Carolina, though, they've got Biden up by a fraction of a point. You go to the next tier, Georgia, Ohio, Texas, Iowa. These are states Trump won by high single digits in 2016. What's the polling showing there? Again, Trump up a couple in Texas, a tie in Ohio. That 5-point lead yesterday was certainly the biggest thing Biden's seen out of Ohio. Georgia, Iowa, Biden leads very, very slight. But again, that's also like in Iowa. Iowa was almost, it was a 10-point race almost in 2016. And now Biden leading by 1. Big shift there in the polls, but very, very competitive.
All right.
Steve Kornacki, thank you very much. Wow, this is going to really go down to the wire and perhaps over it. You never know.
Yeah, it really is. And, of course, you look at something like the state of Florida. And as Steve said, Hillary Clinton was up plus 6 percentage points going into the night. Now we have not just Democrats, but Republicans thinking that both parties are cannibalizing their same-day voting. So we're not exactly sure what that 6% is going to look like. Have Republicans, by cannibalizing, I mean, have they taken voters that would normally vote on Election Day, that Donald Trump's going to depend on Election Day, and have they just moved them forward and had them voting early? So going to be a lot of questions, a lot of moving parts. As Steve said, a lot of shifting alliances going on in the state of Florida, also across the country, and we'll be following it. But I do think we're going to get a pretty clear message out of Florida early in the evening. So, Peter Baker, we're going into the final weekend, obviously. So much can happen in the final weekend. Of course, we have things are far different than, say, they were in 1980 when Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan seemed to be tied on the Friday going into the final weekend, and then Reagan had the late surge. We've got, in some states, 60% of the voters, 70% of the voters, 80% of the voters, they've already banked their vote right now. So not as much of a shift, but still, in a race that could possibly be this close, this final dash to the end could make a big difference. How are the two candidates going to be talking to their voters to try to bring home a victory?
Yeah, I think this is all fascinating, by the way, and thank you for the education. I'm glad to know about the difference between Florida and Pennsylvania myself. I think that the last weekend matters so much less this time than any election we've ever seen, right? We've always wondered what could be the last-minute surprise that changed some votes. We saw it in 2000 when George W. Bush's DUIs became public in the last couple of days. It probably sapped his vote and threw it into a recount in Florida. We saw, obviously, the Osama bin Laden tape in 2004. We've seen so many instances where last-minute things seem to change the outcome, or at least on by a few points. But as you point out, with 82 million votes already cast, right, roughly 60% of the total cast in 2016, they're speaking to a smaller and smaller set of voters, right? What Biden and Trump today in the Midwest will be doing is talking to the handful, not the handful, but the relatively small percentage of people who haven't gotten out to the vote yet. Very few of them, you feel like, are undecided. This is really a matter of getting people to the polls who are already inclined to vote for one candidate or the other. Could anything they say in these last few days really change that? Hard to see what that would be. It seems to me the bigger suspense, the bigger unknown at this point is how many of those votes get counted and what standards are applied, right? And those are the fights that are being held right now in these courts. Day after day, we're seeing new rulings in the Supreme Court or other federal courts setting out the rules of the road for election night and for the days that follow. Those are the really bigger battles going on than the set-piece speeches that the candidates will do.
Yeah, and again, there have been some surprising decisions that have come out of the Supreme Court. I will say, Mika, as far as the Supreme Court goes, they know, as does the rest of America, or at least people that are following closely, speaking of these court cases, Donald Trump is going to be ahead in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin the first day, most likely, because that's day of voters. They're going to favor him. And then once he goes ahead, he and the Republican Party and their lawyers are going to try to stop the vote. They're going to use whatever means they can to get to the Supreme Court and stop the vote while he's ahead. They've been trying in one court case after another to cut short the voting in those Midwest states because they understand if all those votes are counted, obviously it's going to benefit Joe Biden, and most likely Joe Biden's going to win. So Donald Trump knows, and his lawyers have admitted as much, that their goal is to challenge as much as they can challenge and stop the vote while Donald Trump is still ahead, because we know he's going to be ahead.
He's very transparent.
We know he's very transparent about it. So I am certainly hoping that federal judges up and down the line understand they've got to let all the votes be counted, or they'll be seen as nothing more. And it'll be very transparent. It's just a flunky for Donald J. Trump.
Casey Hunt, we've talked a little bit about Pennsylvania, a lot about Florida. You're looking at Georgia. Tell us why.
Yeah, Mika, and it's a bit surprising. And I was, as I was listening to Joe talk about Florida, and what he has been saying is completely reflected in my reporting as well, that it is so incredibly close and that we simply don't know at this point how that's going to break down. But what has been surprising to me is that I have some strategists now saying that they think that Biden is more likely to win Georgia perhaps than Florida, which is really something considering, you know, Florida's been on the map as a swing state the entire time. And we've been talking about Georgia for several election cycles now, thinking, OK, well, it's going to go blue. It's going to go blue. It's going to go blue this time. No, really this time. And it's never happened. But there's a couple things going on. You know, one is that Stacey Abrams has been doing a lot of infrastructure work down there, especially with black voters. But two, the antipathy toward Trump is just off the charts. And, you know, Joe, we talked about the suburbs of Atlanta, places like Buckhead, where there is just this intolerance for what they have been seeing out of the White House and the character of the president all the way along, that it has really accelerated the change, along with the demographics and other things in Georgia. So, you know, if Biden can put Georgia on the map, we've got a much different potential outcome here, or at the very least, we have a different election night, potentially, because then all of a sudden, late results from Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania become less important as you're trying to count up to 270 electoral college votes, you know, before the end of the evening. Joe.
So, Jason Johnson, I asked Steve that question about sort of a viewer's guide to make the point that Joe just made about how these states are going to fall. We may know a lot about Florida. We may know a lot about North Carolina and Georgia and Ohio. But Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, People just have to be ready for those first numbers to show Donald Trump with a lead and then have some patience, which I know is going to be difficult to see how it plays out. So how will you be watching on Tuesday night? What will be the indicators to you early on or as we get deeper into the night about which way this race is tilting?
Willie, the most important thing to me that I've paid attention to Pennsylvania, that I've paid attention to in Arizona, that I pay attention to in Texas is not just the raw numbers, but taking a look at first-time voters and voters who skipped out on 2016. If you voted in 2008 and 2012 and skipped out in 2016, you are more than likely an Obama coalition voter who was turned off by both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. When I see 8–10% of early voters being people who skipped 2016 or first-time voters, that presages very, very well for Joe Biden. So I'm going to be looking at election day numbers and saying, okay, when you're doing the exit polls, how many same-day voters are first-time voters? How many same-day voters didn't vote in 2016? It looks to me right now that Donald Trump is probably going to have anywhere from a 6 to 10% same-day election lead in places like Pennsylvania and places like Florida in order to make sure that he has a seat. So I think those things are key. The other thing is this, and this is really important. We just saw in Wisconsin a new federal court ruling that says, you know, they're going to end the 7-day window in order to count votes. This is just a slow-moving coup. It is absolutely illegitimate to stop people from voting. I've said before, if I'm in line at 6:59 and I don't get to vote until 8:05, my vote still counts. So why would my mail-in ballot not count if it doesn't come in until after 8 o'clock? So we're also going to be looking at, or I'm going to be looking at, what kind of pushback is there at the state level if you have enough votes coming in after 8 o'clock or at 7:59 that they believe are going to change the result? Because I promise you, if for some reason Joe Biden is ahead in Michigan and ahead in Wisconsin and ahead on Pennsylvania after Election Day, Donald Trump and his minions will immediately flip the script and say, we need to count these extra ballots.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
So Peter Baker, we have two pretty big news stories going on. We had the stock market crashing earlier this week. It rebounded yesterday. We got good GDP numbers. Overall economy still obviously suffering from what's happened over the past 9 months, but 7.4% growth. On the other side of that, over 1,000 people dead yesterday from COVID-19, while members of Donald Trump's own family are trying to play it down. What do you sense covering this race is going to have the bigger impact going into the final weekend? COVID or a bump in the GDP?
Well, I think COVID, obviously, because it's surging right now, is dominating attention, and is dominating attention in places that's not helpful to the president. 1,000 deaths is huge, obviously. To have Donald Trump Jr. say last night that the deaths are almost nothing is, flying in the face of reality. And I think you can't argue with a disease. You can't argue with people being in the hospital. You can't argue with people being sick. You can convince people that the economy is better than it really is, perhaps, but you cannot convince people, I think, if they're seeing in their own lives the impact of a pandemic. And the president wants to say it's just the media talking about it. Well, it's not. It's about, 229,000 deaths so far in this country, and that's just in the last 8 months. That's a very hard toll to simply wipe away. Now, there's a lot of Republicans who wish he had talked about the economy more, because he could have used those numbers that came out yesterday as a jumping off point to make his best pitch, which is, I built the economy before, I'll build it again, right? The voters showed in polls they give him more credit generally on the economy than Biden, and that's the best selling point a lot of Republicans thought the president had, but he's been, in fact, focusing on Hunter Biden or other topics rather than the one selling point that he has to focus on. He even talked about this at the rally himself yesterday. He said, oh, I get these calls from people who don't know what they're talking about saying I should be talking about the economy. So he's reflecting out loud the conversation that's being had behind closed doors and basically saying, I'm not listening to those people. They're not here. I am. I won, so I know what I'm doing.
Yeah. He just can't do it. He is the definition politically of a one-trick pony. He can do one thing. He can scratch away at cultural divisions, at wedge issues, but not promoting a 7.4% growth and the economy going into the final weekend. There are a lot of people on his own staff and a lot of Republicans in Washington that are banging their heads against the wall. Peter Baker, thank you so much, and congratulations again to you and Susan. Amazing. The man who ran Washington, just a fantastic biography of James Baker. What a great book. What a great story. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Also, this programming note, Joe, Willie, and I will be running election night coverage on Peacock. As we approach the top of the hour, Jason Johnson, I want to ask you about Texas. The vote count certainly is different already compared to 4 years ago. What are you seeing?
94% of the entire vote in 2016 has already gone in Texas, and that's before we head into this final weekend. And over 10% of those voters are people who skipped 2016 or have no voting history whatsoever. I actually think that Texas is going to be the place to watch next Tuesday. People who don't have a voting history are also the people who don't get polled, and a lot of those people tend to lean Democratic. Is it a chance for Joe Biden? Yes. Is it a big chance? No. But there's also a state house in Texas that could be flipped, that could have an impact on writing and rewriting districts next year. I think Texas is actually going to be the place to watch this year, more so than Georgia or even Florida.
All right, Jason Johnson, thank you.